and welcome back to the Care Plan. My name is Jacqueline Boyd and I'm so glad that you're here. It is our pleasure to bring you these videos with tips for wellness. In 2018, just so you're aware, we're going to adjust the schedule and we'll be putting out the videos on the first and third Thursday of every month. So please stay tuned and subscribe. Today our topic is how to hire caregivers. There are many pathways to aging, and some people prefer to live in senior housing facilities where amenities are readily available. The socialization and accessibility suits their personality and goals. Other people, though, want to maintain their home environment. They want to stay home for as long as possible. And often these people are in a position where they need to hire caregivers. Hiring caregivers is one way to support the goal of a safe and quality experience at home. But where do you start? If you've never had someone in your home in this capacity before, it can be a pretty intimidating endeavor. Today we're going to share some of our tips for hiring caregivers. The first step is to answer the financial questions. Figure out if there's a way that the caregiving services can be paid for through maybe the VA or through long-term care insurance. Does your loved one qualify for a community-based program or for caregivers through Medicaid? If none of those are available or accessible, then it's time to look at the budget and see if the budget and assets allow for caregiver services. The second step is to answer the experience and personality questions. This caregiver is going to be in your loved one's home maybe every day of the week, so it's important to make sure that you have the right fit. Identify for yourselves how many years of experience you want the caregiver to have. What are the needs of your loved one? Are we talking about a caregiver who focuses on companionship and activities? Or do you need somebody who's really well skilled in personal care, in shower assistance, in bathing assistance? These areas of experience differ from caregiver to caregiver, so having a clear idea about the experience and personality you'd like your caregiver to have is important. Also, for some people, age is a factor. Some people respond better to a caregiver that's closer to their age, but some people want a caregiver who's younger, who reminds them of a grandchild or the generation below them. The third step is to figure out where you are finding your caregiver. This is perhaps the biggest challenge. Everybody wants to save money by and large, but when it comes to caregiving, you have three basic options at three different price points. So the first option is an independent caregiver. That means that this caregiver is not through an agency. You typically find them through informal sources like friends or family, maybe the church. Sometimes if you put an ad out or find an online database with caregivers, these people are called independent caregivers. They negotiate the price with you directly, and there's no oversight, no background check, or body that will take the relief off of you as the employer. With an independent caregiver, you are the employer, which means that between you and this person, you have to figure out how taxes are getting paid, insurance coverage, workers' comp, and a myriad of many other issues. So when it comes to independent caregivers, we describe that model as low cost but high risk. So aside from independent caregivers, there's two other options for finding caregivers. The second is registries. Registries are kind of an in-between between the independent model and the agency model. Their price is usually moderate, as is the risk. So they do some of the upfront onboarding. They interview the caregivers, they do the background checks, and they may provide some training initially. But after that, you're still on your own. You're still the employer. So it's almost like a matchmaking service, but for caregivers. The third option is agencies. Now this is what we recommend for all of the families we work with because it provides you the lowest risk. You are not the employer when it comes to an agency. They are the employer. And all the caregivers are bonded, insured. They have to go through regular training on an annual basis, and there's a support system. So with agencies, we really appreciate the fact that if your specific caregiver is sick or can't show up, has a family emergency, that agency has sometimes up to 100 other caregivers on the bench, so you're never left in the lurch. So to recap that, when you're finding a caregiver and trying to hire a caregiver, you have three basic options. That's the independent caregiver model, the registry model, or the agency model. Whenever possible, we recommend the agency model to make sure that you have peace of mind and high caliber caregivers. It's important to note that the licenses and models that we're describing vary a bit state to state. So what we're talking about is primarily relevant for Illinois, but across the country, there are agencies, there's companies that work nationwide, and you can certainly find a caregiving agency in your area. The next things to be aware of are just that there's some stumbling blocks that everybody runs into when they think about hiring caregivers. The first is understanding the basics of what the state requires, and sometimes that means limitations on what the caregiver can do. It's not safe to assume that the caregiver can do everything you're anticipating. For example, if you have a loved one who is on hospice or who is requiring a great deal of care, if you hire a live-in caregiver, they have to be able to get rest and sleep time. And that can mean that if your person needs care every single hour, that the live-in model doesn't work for you. In many states, there's restrictions about what the caregivers are able to do. For example, in Illinois, caregivers cannot fill pill boxes. They cannot administer medication. A nurse has to dispense the medication or the family does. Another stumbling block that many people run into is how to approach tipping or financial support with the caregiver. This is another reason why we recommend agencies, because all of the money is exchanged through the agency. There's no tips, there's no gifts, and it's not an expectation. So just be aware, we would recommend that any financial matters are out of the hands of the caregiver. So whether it's tipping or gift giving, or if you're anticipating having the caregiver maybe write checks or do bill pay support, really think about that carefully and maybe consider getting a daily money manager instead. So again, when hiring caregivers, it's important to remember that there's a lot to take into account, and we haven't even gotten into the management aspect. So stay tuned for later this month, because we're going to be talking about managing caregivers once you've found that perfect caregiver. Thank you so much for watching. Don't hesitate to give us a call if you have any questions, and take good care.